Have you ever found yourself in a moment so unexpected, so intense, that it completely changed the way you saw someone you thought you knew? That's exactly what happened to me. What started as harmless teasing and playful banter with my half-sister quickly spiraled into something I never saw coming, and something I'll never be able to forget.
Before we begin, I need to let you know that this story touches on mature themes. It explores family dynamics, emotional struggles, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, this might not be the video for you. But if you're ready to hear my story, let's get into it. I never thought I'd be in this situation. Sitting alone in my room, lights low, scrolling through old photos like they could somehow fix what was broken. Most of them were of Neve. Her smile, her eyes, the way she used to look at me. It felt like it all belonged to someone else now, someone happier, someone who didn't feel so disconnected. Lately, it's like we're just two strangers pretending everything's fine. She's busy, I'm distracted, and the space between us keeps growing. I can't even remember the last time she reached out first. I stared at my phone, half waiting for a text that wasn't coming, and trying to convince myself that it didn't matter. But it did. I let out this long breath and sank deeper into my chair, telling myself to stop overthinking. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, steady, coming down the hall. For a second, I thought maybe Nevi had come home early. But when I looked up, it wasn't her. Chloe stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame like she'd been there for hours. Her oversized t-shirt hung just low enough to cover her, but not enough to make it easy. She didn't even flinch when I looked at her, just stood there, calm, like she knew exactly what she was doing. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was soft, teasing, like she already knew the answer. I sat up straighter, trying not to sound as uneasy as I felt. "Just looking through some pictures." She raised an eyebrow and stepped inside without asking. "What kind of pictures?" Her eyes flicked down to my phone, then back up at me. Before I could even respond, she was sitting on my bed, legs tucked under her like she lived there. Her shirt shifted when she moved, and I tried not to notice. But I did, and she caught me looking. "Old ones," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Just stuff from before." She smiled like she knew exactly what I meant. "You really need to stop being so serious all the time," she said. "You're always in here by yourself, acting like the world's about to end." I laughed, but it felt fake. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Her voice was softer now, almost too soft. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know?" I didn't know what to say to that. She was looking at me like she actually cared, and for a second, I wanted to believe her. But the way she was sitting, the way her shirt fell just right, I couldn't ignore the tension hanging in the air. I hated myself for noticing it, but I did. "I just need some space," I said, pushing myself to stand up. Chloe didn't move. She just smiled, that same knowing smile she'd been using for months. "Good night, Harold." Her voice lingered even after I left the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done with me. Not even close. Chloe was always the loud one, the one who made everyone laugh, even when they didn't want to. I remember how she used to follow me around when we were younger, always asking questions, always finding ways to get my attention. Back then, it was harmless. She was just the kid sister who wanted to tag along, and I didn't think much of it. I used to tease her about how she couldn't sit still. She hated being ignored, and I guess that never really changed. Even now, she's always finding ways to stay in the center of things. But somewhere along the line, the way she looked at me shifted. And the way I saw her shifted too. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe when she turned 16. She wasn't a little kid anymore, but I still saw her that way. Or tried to, at least. She'd linger in rooms longer than she needed to. She'd bump into me when she walked by or lean just a little too close when she was talking. At first, I brushed it off. "That's just Chloe," I told myself. "She's playful. She's affectionate. It doesn't mean anything." But it got harder to ignore, especially when no one else was around. She'd sit next to me on the couch and pull her legs up, always making sure her skin brushed against mine. Or she'd walk into the kitchen wearing one of those oversized shirts that barely covered anything, pretending like it was normal. And maybe it was. Maybe I was the one making it weird. But it didn't feel normal anymore. Her parents didn't notice. Or if they did, they never said anything. They were always busy, work, trips, dinners with friends. Chloe was used to being left to figure things out on her own. Maybe that's why she always clung to me. She knew I wouldn't push her away. At least I didn't used to. But now, every time she leaned in too close or touched my arm, I felt this knot in my stomach. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear. Fear that I was imagining it. Fear that I wasn't. I started avoiding her when I could. I'd close my door and pretend I was busy. I'd leave the house just to get some space. But it didn't matter. She always found a way to be there, waiting in the hallway, sitting at the table, acting like nothing had changed. Except everything had. And the worst part? I didn't stop her. I told myself it was harmless. She was just being friendly, just being Chloe. But deep down, I knew better, and I hated myself for not doing anything about it. I was at my desk, headphones on, staring at my screen, but I wasn't getting anything done. My mind was a mess. The room felt too quiet, even with music playing in my ears. I kept telling myself to snap out of it, to focus, to stop thinking about her. But the harder I tried, the more impossible it felt. I heard the door creak open behind me. I didn't turn around right away. I figured it was Chloe, but I hoped if I ignored her, maybe she'd leave. She didn't. "What are you looking at?" Her voice cut through the music. I pulled off my headphones and turned in my chair. And that's when I saw her. The oversized shirts were gone. Instead, she wore this tight tank top, thin straps, low cut, and a pair of shorts so small they might as well not have been there at all. My stomach dropped. I told myself to look away, but my eyes didn't listen. "Nothing," I said, my voice coming out strained. "Just messing around." She smiled, slow and deliberate, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. She stepped closer, letting her fingers trail along the edge of my desk as she walked by. My throat felt dry. I shifted in my chair, trying to play it cool, but I could feel the heat crawling up my neck. "You always say that," she said, stopping right next to me. "You're always in here staring at nothing." I laughed nervously, but it didn't sound right. I couldn't stop looking at her. Her hair was pulled back in this loose ponytail, but a few strands had fallen free, framing her face. She looked effortless, and she knew it. "Shouldn't you be doing something?" I asked, trying to push her away with words, but they didn't come out as sharp as I wanted. "I am doing something," she said, leaning against the desk and crossing her arms. The move pushed her chest up just enough to make me look again, and I hated myself for it. "I'm talking to you." She smiled when she said it. This soft, teasing smile that made my pulse speed up. I told myself to stand up, to walk out, to do anything but sit there. But I didn't move. "Chloe, come on," I said, but even I could hear the crack in my voice. "Come on what?" she asked, tilting her head. "You're acting weird." She reached out and brushed her fingers against my arm. It was light, barely a touch, but it was enough to make my breath catch. I pulled away like her skin had burned me, and for the first time her smile faded. "I'm serious," I said, forcing myself to sound firm. "You need to stop." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't step back. If anything, she leaned in closer. "Why?" That one word hit harder than it should have. Why? Because it was wrong. Because it wasn't supposed to feel like this. Because I knew if I didn't stop it now, I wouldn't be able to stop it at all. But I didn't say any of that. I just stood up so fast that my chair scraped against the floor. "I need some air," I said, walking past her before she could say anything else. I felt her eyes on me the whole way out of the room, and even after I shut the door behind me, I couldn't breathe right. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and no matter how many times I told myself to calm down, I couldn't. Because I knew, deep down, I didn't want her to stop. I told myself I wouldn't let it happen. Over and over, I repeated it in my head. "She's just testing you. She's pushing boundaries. Walk away. But I didn't walk away. And when she came back later that night, I didn't tell her to leave. I was lying on my bed, lights low, trying to drown out the noise in my head. I thought she'd gone to bed. I thought I was safe. But then my door opened, and there she was. No oversized shirt this time, just that tight tank top and those shorts. She didn't knock, she didn't ask. She just walked in like she knew she was supposed to be there. Can we talk? Her voice was softer than before, almost nervous. But there was something underneath it, something deliberate. I sat up, not trusting myself to stay where I was. Chloe, I don't think… I just need to know. She cut me off and sat down at the edge of the bed. I could feel the heat from her skin, and I hated how much I noticed it. She reached out, her hand landing lightly on my shoulder. I froze. I should have moved. I should have told her to stop. But I didn't. Her fingers traced down my arm, slow and steady. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. She leaned in closer, and I could smell her perfume. Light, sweet, and completely intoxicating. Her eyes locked on mine, and for the first time I saw something different in them. This wasn't just teasing. This wasn't just Chloe looking for attention. I know you feel it too, she whispered. You don't have to pretend. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to stand up, push her away, and put an end to it. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, frozen, as she moved closer. Her lips brushed against mine, just barely, and everything inside me snapped. My hand found the back of her neck, pulling her in, and suddenly we weren't thinking anymore. We weren't talking. We weren't brother and sister. None of that mattered in that moment. I knew it was wrong. I knew I'd regret it. But I couldn't stop. My hands moved on their own, finding her waist, her hips. She climbed onto my lap, her breath warm against my skin. Every nerve in my body was screaming, but none of it was loud enough to make me pull away. Her fingers tangled in my hair, and I felt my control slipping. My thoughts were a mess, fragments of guilt, fear, and something I couldn't even name. I told myself it was just a mistake, just this once, but deep down, I knew that was a lie. When it was over, we didn't speak. She rested her head against my chest, her breathing soft and steady, like nothing had happened. But I couldn't breathe right. My heart was still racing, and my mind was already tearing itself apart. What did I just do? I wanted to tell her to leave, but I couldn't make the words come out. Instead, I just stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, that it didn't change everything. But it did, and there was no taking it back. I couldn't sleep. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. My chest felt tight, and my head wouldn't stop spinning. Chloe was next to me, her breathing soft and steady, like nothing had happened, like this was normal. But it wasn't, not even close. I shifted, trying to put some space between us. She stirred a little but didn't wake up. Her hand brushed against my arm and I flinched before gently pushing it away. I sat up, careful not to wake her, and ran my fingers through my hair. My skin felt hot, like I was trapped in my own body. I needed air. I needed to think. I stood up and grabbed my phone off the desk. My hands were shaking as I turned it on. No messages, no calls. But then, just as I was about to put it down, it lit up. A text from Neve. Missed you tonight. Call me tomorrow? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? Everything's fine? I love you? None of it felt right. None of it felt true. I glanced back at Chloe. She'd shifted onto her side, one leg bent, her shirt pushed up just enough to remind me of what we'd done. My stomach turned. I hated myself for how much I still wanted her, even now, when every part of me knew how wrong it was. This was a mistake, I muttered under my breath. My voice sounded hollow, like I didn't even believe myself. Chloe opened her eyes, barely awake, and smiled. You keep saying that, she whispered. But you don't mean it. I swallowed hard and looked away. Go back to sleep, Chloe. She shrugged, like it was no big deal, and rolled over. Just like that, it was over for her. No guilt, no panic. Meanwhile, I felt like I was about to come apart. I sat back down at my desk and opened Nevea's text again. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to type anything. Instead, I put the phone down and buried my face in my hands. What the hell had I done? I thought about Neve, the late nights, the distance, the way she barely touched me anymore. And for a second, I tried to justify it. Tried to convince myself that Chloe had given me something I'd been missing. But that didn't make it okay. Nothing made it okay. I could still feel Chloe's skin against mine, still hear the way she'd said my name. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shut it out. The guilt kept creeping back in, stronger every time. I hated myself for giving in, but what scared me more was the part of me that didn't regret it. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Neve. Everything okay? I jumped up from my chair, pacing the room. I couldn't keep this from her forever. She'd figure it out. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually. And when she did, it was going to destroy everything. I looked back at Chloe. She was still asleep, completely at peace, like none of it mattered. But it mattered to me. And no matter what happened next, I knew there was no going back. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. It felt like it was eating me alive, and I needed to let it out, at least to someone. So I called Jackson. He picked up after the second ring. "What's up, man?" He sounded half asleep, but I didn't care. I needed to talk. "Can you come over?" My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. "Now?" He paused. "Harold, it's late. Please." I guess he could hear it in my voice because he didn't argue. He just said he'd be there. When he showed up, I didn't waste time. I barely even said hi before it all started pouring out. I told him about Chloe, how things had changed between us, how I let it happen, how I couldn't stop thinking about it. By the time I was done, I felt like I couldn't even look him in the eye. Jackson sat there for a while, quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the background, and the longer he stayed silent, the worse I felt. Finally, he leaned back and rubbed his face. "You need to end it," he said, his voice low but firm. "Cut her off. Completely." "It's not that simple." My voice came out sharp, defensive, but he didn't flinch. "Yeah, it is." He leaned forward, looking me dead in the eye. "Harold, listen to me. This doesn't end well. You know that." I nodded, but it didn't feel real. How was I supposed to just act like it never happened? Like I could erase her? "And Neve?" I asked. "What do I tell her?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Nothing. You don't tell her anything." I stared at him, stunned. "You're saying I should lie to her?" "I'm saying you already did." His words hit harder than I expected. "You lied the second you let this happen. And if you tell her now, it's over. You know that, right?" I dropped my head into my hands. He was right. Telling her wouldn't fix anything. It would just blow everything up. "And Chloe?" I asked quietly. Jackson exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. "You block her. You don't answer her calls. You shut it down before it gets worse." But it already felt worse. I hadn't even told him the whole truth. About the way she still looked at me. About the texts she'd sent earlier that day. The ones I couldn't bring myself to delete. The photos. The words. I knew I should block her, but I couldn't. Every time my phone buzzed, part of me hoped it was her. And that scared me more than anything else. "You're not hearing me?" Jackson said, leaning closer. "If you don't stop this now, you're going to lose everything." His words hung in the air long after he left. But even as I sat there, staring at my phone, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to listen. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at my phone. Her name was still at the top of my messages, Chloe. I hovered over it, my finger shaking. My stomach churned as I tapped her name, opened the thread, and scrolled one last time through everything she'd sent. The pictures, the words, the reminders of what I'd done. I took a breath and hit delete. It was like ripping off a bandage that had been stuck too long, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. I opened my settings, blocked her number, and stared at the screen until it went black. I wanted to feel relieved, like I'd done the right thing, like I'd finally ended it. But all I felt was emptiness. That hollow, sinking feeling wouldn't go away. Chloe didn't text again. At least, not that I'd know. But it didn't matter. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she looked at me, the way she felt, the way it felt impossible to let her go even now. And then there was Neve. I started noticing how much she was noticing me, the way her eyes lingered a little longer when I said I was working late, the way she'd ask questions that felt harmless but didn't. She knew something was off. I could see it. And part of me wanted to tell her, to get it all out and deal with the fallout. But the words never came. One night, after dinner, she sat down next to me on the couch. "You've been quiet lately," she said. Her voice was soft, careful. "Is something wrong?" I froze. My chest tightened. And for a second, I thought about telling her everything. About Chloe, about the texts, about how much I hated myself for letting it happen. But I didn't. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She didn't look convinced. She reached for my hand and I let her. But it felt wrong. It felt heavy. Like her touch was pressing down on me instead of pulling me closer. She leaned in, kissed me lightly, and whispered, "I miss you." I swallowed hard and kissed her back, but I didn't say it. I couldn't. The guilt was too loud. Over the next few days, things almost felt normal again. I told myself I was moving past it, that I could bury it and keep going. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Chloe. Every time Neve touched me, I felt Chloe's skin instead. I started pulling away, little by little. Neve noticed, but she stopped asking. I think part of her didn't want to know. And maybe I didn't either, because knowing meant facing it, and I wasn't ready for that. As for Chloe, she didn't reach out. She didn't show up at my door or try to see me. It was like she'd disappeared completely, but I knew better. She was still there, living in my head, in the cracks I couldn't seem to seal shut. I told myself I'd done the right thing, that blocking her and cutting it off was enough. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not really, and I had no idea if it ever would be. This story isn't about justifying what happened. It's about showing how small cracks in relationships can turn into something much bigger and much harder to fix. Harold's choices didn't come out of nowhere. They were built on loneliness, temptation, and mistakes that snowballed before he could stop them. Infidelity doesn't just affect the people involved. It creates ripples, pain, guilt, and questions that never seem to go away. Harold may have blocked Chloe and tried to move on, but the scars of what happened will always be there. And the worst part? He's the one who has to carry them, even if no one else knows they're there. So now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Harold's situation? Would you have confessed, cut it off sooner, or tried to bury the secret and move forward like he did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Sometimes hearing other perspectives can help make sense of stories like this. Before you go, like this video if it made you think or feel something. It helps share the story with others who might be going through something similar. Share it with someone you trust, whether it's to start a conversation or just to remind someone they're not alone in dealing with guilt, temptation, or regret. Subscribe for more stories like this. Relationships are messy, and sometimes hearing about them helps us understand our own lives a little better. Thanks for watching and being part of this discussion. Your voice matters, and I can't wait to hear what you think.